people about it. Go there, groups like Interfaith Peace Builders. Talk to your congressman. If you have not gone and met with your Congress staff, or your congressman right away, but if you haven't met with your congressman's office, I recommend, or call your congressman's office, get in the habit of doing it. It's something that's important for you to do as a citizen in your democracy. What if we can't change this policy? This is in kind of policy. It's the rise of something called the BDS movement. It's very hot. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. In South Africa, we have the issue of apartheid in South Africa. And I am going to say that what's happening in the West Bank is very apartheid-like. Desmond Tutu has said that. Jimmy Carter has said that's the choice, peace or apartheid. And it is very apartheid-like. So with South African apartheid, what happened was, the Reagan administration wasn't taking the vanguard on that. They weren't calling out about racism in apartheid South Africa. So what did people do? Well, people your age, for the most part, they got active. They demanded that their campuses not do business with companies that were doing business with South Africa. They mounted boycotts and protests. This is what the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is about, and it's about to break. It's very hot right now. And one of the organizations that I work with is leading a boycott of Motorola cell phones. They have a wholly owned Israeli subsidiary that makes a lot of electronics for the Israeli military, including weapons-related military communications equipment. And we think we can put pressure on Motorola to stop doing this kind of business by not buying their cell phones. So that's one way. And I think I've covered most of the material. So we can go ahead and open it up for questions, and we should pass around the sign-up for people who want to get more involved.
And we'd really like feedback here too, like what are your thoughts on the conflict, what possible solutions are?
I like challenging questions too.
Yeah, y'all need to, it's up to y'all, y'all go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I was wondering earlier, he said that a key tenet of Israel was that all the Arab states were going to war against Israel, they're ganging up on Israel. And I was wondering, you talked about the smuggling, especially the weapons smuggling from Egypt into Gaza. You can kind of see how they might.
Oh yeah, the Israelis definitely feel surrounded. However, the fundamental, they still, Israelis definitely got this long historical shadow of that, of feeling threatened by this Arab enemy. And they talk about Arabs as if they're this giant monolithic enemy, which, if you know anything about Arab culture, is kind of ridiculous because Arabs laugh about their own disorganization.
But on the same flip side, Palestinians tend to think Israel is totally evil, which is poppycock.
Yeah.
There are good Israeli Jewish people that are also very active in promoting peace. And
And the fear and the mindset for that, they have definitely messed over. What has changed, though, is when Jimmy Carter negotiated the Camp David Accords in the late 70s, Egypt dropped out of that conflict. And when Egypt dropped out, there was really no real credible Arab military threat anymore. Now, you could say Saddam Hussein, maybe a little bit in Iraq, but he was defamed after the war, the Persian Gulf War in 1990.
well, Hussein only joined in at the later moments when he felt there was going to be an invasion by the U.S. Then he rallied behind the Palestinian cause.
Yeah, Hussein used the Palestinian cause.
But I think it's important to mention those tunnels are used for humanitarian aid as well as
Well,
weapons smuggling.
not humanitarian aid, but black market goods, anything.
No, humanitarian aid as well as weapons.
Oh, are they?
I mean, yeah, both. It's both. I mean, how do you do that though? I mean, how do you bomb the tunnels?
Humanitarian aid, not enough is getting in, and they're not letting enough in.
I agree.
don't know if
I agree.
humanitarian aid groups are actually struggling through the tunnels, but everything you want to get is coming from the black market.
As a result of
To answer your
blockade,
question,
though.
Israelis definitely have that shadow of the fear. But the problem is, right now, they're the superpower. They don't really have an Arab threat anymore. All the Arab countries are like, we're sick of this conflict, we want Israel to make some deal with the Palestinians, and we don't want to do this anymore. So there's not really a threat from neighboring Arab countries. There are a few, like Hamas can launch rockets, but there's a tenuous ceasefire right now, thank goodness. And Hezbollah can launch rockets from Lebanon, but there's not really any real threat beyond that right now. And to add to that too, because of the suicide bombings in the early 2000s, Israelis are very shell-shocked. Another thing is they don't see what's happening. When I describe all these things that are happening in the occupied territories, which I can talk about in huge detail, Israelis don't see that because they're not allowed to go to those parts. They can go to the settlements and drive to the settlements with their yellow license plates, but they're not going to go to the Palestinian areas and see how the Palestinians are doing on the occupation. And their attitudes have been hardened by the violence, so they don't care in many cases. Not all.
But however, because of the blockade and the limited supplies of humanitarian aid that do go to the Palestinian territories, yes, they do employ those tunnels for transporting humanitarian aid as well as weapons from Egypt. It only makes sense. If you're limited in supplies because of blockade, what other means do you have to provide humanitarian aid? It's the nature of the beast, I guess.
All right. More questions? Watermans? Yeah.
In my generation, we were brought up to believe that whatever Israel does is this one. And I'm trying to explain that to some of the students. It's right, that Americans are traveling with Israel. And we also know the claims to Israel. We live with them for a while. And one thing that they always said to us is that in 48 we were thrilled. And then these people fought and these kings were stronger, and now they want to go back and say, okay, we're sorry, and just give us all our land back. And so there's that, wait a minute, you know, we were fine in the beginning. You decided to not go along with the UN and fought, and we beat you, and now you just want it all back.
Yeah, you lost.
You lost.
Yeah,
you lost. And now you want to go back to where it was. And so.
Under the right of return, they do have that right, according to international law, to go back, and if they're willing to not fight. What you have to understand is
You're saying the Palestinians have the right
to
to
return
And that
live
is
as
under
equals
the-
in Israeli society.
and that is
Supposedly that is,
the UN has said that. That was part of
that's
this.
according to international law, the right of return of refugees. Yeah, Israelis will definitely say, yeah, we lost, tough luck,
Yeah.
we lost all the land. Problem is a lot of them didn't fight. They just were caught in the middle of the fighting and lost their homes. Actually, there were a lot of massacres too. I don't go into it too much, but recent historians have gone into it. There was an ethnic cleansing campaign. And it is one of the more controversial things, but historically it's in the record. And that's if you take, it's called New Historians. Israelis, they just accepted the government's word on what happened in War 48. So there's a historical record for the Israeli government. And in about the late 80s is when people started to look back and say, okay, I'm studying history, let's look at the war of independence. So one is a Zionist guy named Benny Morris. And his book is called The Birth of the Palestinian Refugee Problem. Now, he documents all the stuff that happened, but he's like, there was war, who cares? He justifies it because it goes along with the Zionist ideology. Another person who's a very interesting character is Ilan Pappy, who's an Israeli who went and looked into this, and he's considered the foremost Israeli Palestinologist, or I guess in some circles a traitor to some Israelis. And it's just interesting, but it wasn't as simple as they just left. There was war. There were people who were forcibly expelled. And for the Israelis, they saw that as necessary to create their Jewish state. And it's a tragedy and an irony that in order to create a homeland for one group of people that was persecuted and living in diaspora, another group of people had to be cast out.
I think there was something called Plan D, which was intentional.
Yes.
There you go.
So if you're interested in that kind of debate, the two books I recommend are The Birth of the Refugee Problem by Benny Morris, and he's the Zionist, so he's going to say that it was justified. And then there's Benny Morris's The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Not Benny Morris's, Ilan Pappy's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. And obviously, his take on it. So, yes, sir.
Going back to 1948, when the United Nations partitioned the country, you mentioned that Jews were about 1/3 approximately.
Yeah,
of the
about
population,
38%.
and Arabs were 2/3. I believe when the United Nations divided the land, they divided it in something comparable to that proportion, so that the Jews were given much less than 50%, but they were then attacked by the Arab countries around them, and they fought and won, as you said. But I just wanted students to understand, it didn't start out at 78.
Yeah, it didn't start out.
It started